Decision 80. NBC News reports the results of our national election. From the NBC News Election Center in New York, here are Tom Brokaw and John Chancellor.
Good evening and welcome to NBC News' coverage of the 1980 presidential election. Our team of correspondents, analysts, pollsters, and commentators is assembled here in New York and around the country to see if Jimmy Carter can win re-election or if Ronald Reagan will be going to the Oval Office. We have been polling around the country in the key states, NBC News and the Associated Press, and what we're learning in the key states is that makes us believe that Ronald Reagan will win a very substantial victory tonight. Very substantial. That's our belief as of the moment based on polls in key states. And we have two projected states in the presidential race which tend to support that view. In Florida, NBC News projects Ronald Reagan the winner of Florida's 17 electoral votes. And so we will put on our map in blue, for those of you who are watching in color, dark gray and black and white, we'll make Florida our projected winner for Reagan. We have the electoral vote, therefore, given the fact that we had projected Indiana for Reagan earlier, is now 30 for Reagan, two states projected so far. We have another southern state to project. Florida was carried by Carter 4 years ago. Mississippi was carried by Carter 4 years ago. But tonight, our projected winner in Mississippi is the Republican candidate, Ronald Reagan. And so, again, in blue, or dark gray and black and white sets, light gray, I'll get that straight this evening, light gray and blue, we move another 7 electoral votes into our projected column of electoral votes for Reagan, 37. 3 states projected for Ronald Reagan now. And we'd like you to meet some of the people who will be reporting this evening. Jessica Savage will be covering the races for governor in the House of Representatives. Garrick Utley will be covering the Senate races for us, Garrick. And Tom Brokaw and I will share the coverage of the presidential race. David Brinkley, who is recovering nicely from an operation, thank you, will provide commentary from time to time this evening. He's right over there. Well, Tom, it's turning out to be an interesting evening, perhaps more quickly than we had thought.
Well, the pattern that we have on the map already, I think, does show some ominous signs for Jimmy Carter. We have been talking throughout this campaign that he has to hold his political base, as all good politicians do. And there are 2 big chunks of it already tonight. Mississippi and Florida, both states that went for him 4 years ago. Tonight we're showing in the Ronald Reagan column according to our projections. That is not a good sign for Jimmy Carter, very plainly.
No, Jimmy Carter had expected to lose Indiana. There had never been really any doubt about that. But the other 2 are quite serious losses. Tom, go on. I didn't mean to interrupt.
You know, we have some popular vote that we want to show you as well. We'll be counting the electoral vote and the popular vote here tonight. Remember, in the electoral vote, the number is 270. That's what they want to reach. We have about 2% of the popular vote in from across the country. Most of that, 2% of the precincts reporting in so far. Most of that, as you might expect, from Indiana, Mississippi, Florida, those states that we have projected thus far. That is the eastern third of the country. And with that 2% of the precincts reporting in, Ronald Reagan with a pretty commanding lead that translates into 37 electoral votes, none for Carter thus far. Each state has an assigned number of electoral votes based on their representation in Congress. And that comes up to 535 altogether, and then there are 3 at large. So they need to get 270 to win before this night is out. It's a little simpler in the state and congressional races. There it's just a straight vote. Whoever gets the most wins. And Garrick Utley is going to take a look at some of the Senate races.
Right, Tom. And the numbers are very simple in the Senate. 100 Senate seats. It takes 51 to control. As of now in the current session, the Democrats have 59. The Republicans have 41 seats. That means tonight the Republicans must pick up a net gain of 10 seats if they're going to gain control. We'll see whether they make it. There are 34 seats up this year. Now, one has already been filled. Senator Russell Long of Louisiana was reelected. He's a Democrat in September. So tonight we're talking about 33 senatorial contests, and we already have some projections to make. NBC News has projected that in Kentucky, the incumbent Senator Wendell Ford, a Democrat, has been reelected, that he's going to defeat Mary Louise Faust, the Republican candidate, Ford going back to the Senate. And in Indiana, NBC News now projects that Representative Dan Quayle, Republican, will defeat the Democratic incumbent Senator Birch Bayh. Bayh, a liberal Democrat, a major figure in the Senate. He was trying for his 4th term. Indiana has never elected a senator for 4 terms, so the jinxes work against Birch Bayh. What is significant about that, though, is that there are a number of states where Democratic liberal senators face tough conservative challenges. What happened in Indiana may be a trend. Let's look at Iowa. We'll be watching the race there tonight, where Senator John Covert, liberal Democrat, is being challenged by Republican Representative Charles Grassley. Also, we'll be looking at Idaho, where Senator Frank Church, Democrat, the head of the Foreign Relations Committee, is being challenged by Representative Stephen Sims. And in South Dakota, George McGovern, trying for re-election, the 1972 Democratic presidential candidate, challenged by Jim Abner. In all of these states, liberal Democratic senators in a very tight race. They're all too close to call, but they must be a bit worried because Birch Bayh has lost in Indiana. We'll be following these races as the results come in. Now let's go over to Jessica Savage and some of her returns.
We have one projection already. There are 13 gubernatorial races, and NBC News now projects, you heard a little bit earlier, in the state of Indiana, that Lieutenant Governor Robert Orr will be elected governor of Indiana, defeating his Democratic challenger John A. Hillenbrand. Again, NBC News projects Robert Orr, the winner in the gubernatorial race in Indiana, a 4-year term there. That was expected. Republicans were expected to pick that up. The incumbent governor, Otis Bowen, was barred by state law from seeking another term, and the lieutenant governor's politics were very much in line with his bosses, and he's very popular, and so we project that he will be elected in that state. Now, as of a week ago, in some of our House races, the Republicans said they expected to pick up maybe 15 to 25 seats. Well, today, all the Republican Party officials I talked with told me that they have revised that, and they now expect a lot of the Reagan coattailing effect to come into play in many of the states, and they may pick up anywhere from 20 to 35 seats. Some of those seats they hope will belong to some of the Democratic leaders. 7 leaders have been targeted by the GOP. Among them this year, House Majority Leader Jim Wright of Texas. He's in a very tough race in the 12th Congressional District. The Republicans conducted a survey in that district to come up with the best-known person to run against this 26-year House veteran. They settled on Jim Bradshaw, a Fort Worth City Councilman. I, however, talked with Wright a while ago, and he thinks that although it will be a close race, he may be able to turn it around. They're not as confident at the Democratic Party about the race that concerns John Bradamus of Indiana, the House Majority Whip. He was also targeted by the GOP. His opponent in the 3rd District there is John Hyler, who was helped by GOP money and also Political Action Committee money. Bradamus was hurt very much high unemployment in that district. That could be a very close race, one the Republicans hope that they might be able to win. Another tough race, Al Ullman, head of the powerful House Ways and Means Committee in Oregon's 2nd Congressional District. He's having trouble recapturing the seat he's held for 24 years. His challenger, newspaperman Denny Smith, a Vietnam pilot, the son of former Oregon Governor Elmo Smith. If, as is now predicted by sources in the Republican and the Democratic Party, Republicans do pick up maybe 25 seats, they will still be far short of the 218 needed to control the House of Representatives, but they will have a much firmer hold on the type of legislation that that House comes up with. John?
Thank you, Jessica. Tom, looking at Florida, it seems to me that the president down there was damned if he did and damned if he didn't. The Cubans were mishandled in the perception of many of the people in Florida. The whole issue of the Cuban and Haitian refugees, and I do think I have read and been told that it's their perception of Floridians that he mishandled that may be hurting him badly tonight.
Bob Strauss told me just last week in Cleveland, as only Strauss can put it, I said, how's it going in Florida? He said, we got everything but the measles down there. Nothing has gone right for him so far. The thing to keep in mind about both Florida and Mississippi in terms of being Democratic states, they haven't gone with Democrats much in the last 20 years in presidential elections. Florida only twice, I think, since 1952. In Mississippi, they voted for Barry Goldwater in 1964. George Wallace got their vote when he was running in 1968. And Richard Nixon received their vote when he was running against George McGovern. So these are states that there are certain disappearing myths in American politics. One is that the South is a place where they're always going to go Democratic, because they're not always going to do that.
No, and as we see on our map tonight, you can see 2 states down there that are going Republican. We'll have more coverage of the 1980 election after this.
Plymouth, #1 brand of high-mileage American cars. The American way to beat the pump. with cars like the front-wheel drive GC3.
It's the last gas!
The front-wheel drive Horizon Miser.
Last gas!
The front-wheel drive Champ.
The last gas!
And the front-wheel drive Reliant K, America's highest mileage 6-passenger car.
This is it! This is it! Last gas!
Plymouth, #1 in mileage, the American way to beat the pump.
The secret of the Colombian coffee bean was passed from the grandfather of Juan Valdez to the father of Juan Valdez, and then to Juan. For in Colombia, it is an art to pick the coffee bean at the moment of perfect ripeness. It is an art that is passed from generation to generation to generation. It is no accident that Colombian coffee is the richest coffee in the world. It is a national heritage.
In modern elections anymore, it's not enough just to tell you who won, but why they won, and somehow how some of the issues may have cut across the lines. Well, since the polls opened early this morning, we've had people at voting places throughout the country asking voters what was on their minds on this critical election day. As the voters left their polling places, we asked them a series of questions that had to do with issues such as the holding of the hostages in Iran, the state of the economy, the character and the integrity of the candidates. In other words, the most important issues of the day, the issues on the minds of the voters. This NBC News Associated Press poll was carried out at almost 1,100 polling places across the country. By the time this night is over, we will have talked to 12,000 voters for our national poll, and then another 16,000 voters in key states around the country. One of the questions, not surprisingly, that we dealt with in the state polls was the hostage crisis, and whether the events of the past few days turned to be a plus or a minus for President Carter. He thought it was a minus, generally speaking. So far, we've asked approximately 1,400 voters in each of the 3 key battleground states, New York, Ohio, and Illinois, whether they approved of the president's handling of the Iranian hostage crisis. If he hoped that what happened over the weekend would boost his approval rating among voters, then the president was sorely disappointed. He guessed right. It was a negative for him. Only 27% of the voters we talked to in New York said they did approve. In Ohio, only slightly better, 31%. And in Illinois, 33% approved. The last NBC News Associated Press poll on this question, taken throughout the country 2 weeks ago, gave Mr. Carter an approval rating of 36%, and he simply didn't reach that in those 3 battleground states that we showed you just a moment ago. So, clearly, last weekend's events, in terms of the hostages, cut against Mr. Carter with the American voting public, the people who went to the polls today. John?
And the people who went to the polls today and talked to our poll takers in the key states that a president or a candidate needs to win the election have told our poll takers from NBC News and the Associated Press they've given them information that makes us believe that a substantial victory will be awarded to Governor Reagan tonight in the balloting. A substantial victory. He's in California. John Anderson, the independent candidate, is at a hotel in Washington, and the president is at the White House. 3 reports now, the first one from Judy Woodruff at the White House.
The only way to describe the mood here at the White House, John, is just to say that it's very sad. No one is commenting on the record at this point, but aides who are working in the press office are wearing grim expressions. They're staying very quiet. Perhaps the best indicator was Jody Powell's teenage daughter, Emily, who I saw a few minutes ago with tears in her eyes. Reporters haven't seen the president since he flew back to Washington from Georgia earlier today, where he voted. But when he spoke to the townspeople in Plains this morning, almost 12 hours ago, he choked up as he talked about hoping that he had fulfilled his commitment to the people of his region. I think it was evident at that point to the people who have been following the president in this long campaign that the president knew what was ahead. We have been told not to expect any statement from Mr. Carter until about the time the polls close on the West Coast, and of course that's several hours from now. But it does seem obvious that the miracle story of Jimmy Carter, the unknown Georgia governor who finally made it to the White House, is just about at an end. And now we switch to Chris Wallace, who is outside the Reagan home in California.
1669 San Onofre Drive, Reagan's residence in the Pacific Palisades, a spot that could be as famous tomorrow as Plains, Georgia is today. The Reagan camp fully expects that, openly predicting victory for several days now. Reagan spent this afternoon at his home with top aides discussing the start of a possible administration. One state that the Reagan camp will be looking at very closely in the next hour is Kentucky, a border state they say will indicate how Reagan will do in Ohio to the north and in Jimmy Carter's southern base. Of course, the victory already in Florida indicates that Reagan is in good shape in the South, but a victory in Kentucky in this next hour might indicate a landslide across the Midwest. In about an hour, Reagan will leave his home and drive to a dinner with close friends. Later, he'll go to a hotel to watch the final returns, something that people here are looking forward to. Now to Jim Cummins at Anderson headquarters in Washington.
Here at Anderson headquarters, the ballroom at the Hyatt Regency in Washington is just now beginning to fill up. We expect it to be full within the hour with volunteers for Anderson. There won't be much tension here tonight. His people, Anderson's people, had considered him out of the race a long time ago. During the campaign, it was said Anderson had trouble broadening his base, that his primary supporters were white, upper class or upper middle class liberal, the so-called wine and cheese set. Well, for the record, they've already brought out the cheese here tonight, and we expect the wine to arrive later. We are told that Congressman Anderson will come to the hotel within the hour and go right to his suite to watch the returns come in, and that he will come down here after the election is decided to make a statement to his supporters. Tom?
Thank you, Jim. No single night in America may have so many highs and lows as an election night, the winners and the losers. Jessica Savage is going to be keeping track of many of them, the House and the governors. Jessica?
And we have a projection here, Tom. NBC News now projects that Richard Snelling will be elected governor of Vermont. Snelling is running well ahead of his challenger, Democrat M. Jerome Diamond. He's the three-term attorney general for this state. And then NBC News again projects that Richard Snelling will be the winner in the gubernatorial race in Vermont. This is one of the states that have two-year terms, and by winning this race, rather Snelling will be the winner. And winning this race, Snelling now becomes the first Vermont governor to win a third term in this century.
Thank you, Jessica. We'll have more coverage of the 1980 election after this.
Shake your noodle.
Shake, shake, shake your strudel.
Shake, shake, shake your spinach.
The Ziploc storage bag developed by Dow has the unique, easy-to-use seal. It's a zip to lock, and once it's locked, it stays locked. You can shake on that.
Shake, shake, shake your blueberries on Blueberry Hill.
The Ziploc storage bag. You can shake it, but you can't break it.
Your watch is broken.
No, it isn't.
The little winding thing's gone.
There isn't any little winding thing.
How do you wind it?
I don't.
You don't wind it ever?
No, it's a Timex quartz. You never wind it, not ever. It keeps absolutely fanatic time all by itself.
You never touch it?
Practically never. But always when I fly to Paris. Different time, you know. I just push that little button.
That's fascinating.
That's enough talk about my Timex quartz.
David Brinkley is here now with us, and Tom, I believe you've got another projection.
We have two more projections, actually. In the South, Jimmy Carter's home base, which is being broken up tonight by Ronald Reagan. We are projecting the state of Alabama for Ronald Reagan. Reagan wins in Alabama, 9 electoral votes, right next door to Jimmy Carter's home state of Georgia. And the state of Virginia, a state that Ronald Reagan, well, actually the Republicans won 4 years ago. We are projecting once again that Ronald Reagan will win Virginia. So we color those blue, as you can see in our map there. Blue if you have a color television set. I am told that it will be dark gray if you're watching in black and white. Reagan with 2 more important southern states to add to his electoral total. And there it is on our NBC map, as you can see it.
And we have one other projection to make. The votes are coming in from down there now. The polls are closed in several of those states. And NBC News has a projection that will not come as a surprise. We project in the state of Georgia, Jimmy Carter, the winner of its 12 electoral votes. Jimmy Carter carried Georgia the last time by 66% of the vote. It's not surprising that he would carry his home state again. And that gives him 12 electoral votes on our electoral vote projection board. Reagan 58 to Carter's 12 electoral votes. Reagan in several states, Carter so far only in his home state of Georgia.
What do you think about all that?
Well, I guess President Carter's got a color television set and is able to see these things without your light gray and the dark gray, but he can't be very happy about it. It's going very fast and very badly. And I think maybe before this is going to be wound up fairly soon, one way or the other.
Can I just correct one thing, by the way? I just like to get everything sorted out.
Don't tell me the
grays. No, the grays are wrong. I'm wrong. We've been told 3 different ways about the grays. For those of you who have black and white sets, now, John, blue has been converted to light gray. It still is not a good sign. It doesn't change anything in terms of the election, of course, but for those of you watching in black and white, you may want to know where it all stands.
This is too early in the evening for trivia, but my advice to those of you in the audience with black and white sets is run out and get a color set. We'll never get this straight.
You can get good deals on them now.
Or call your friend who has one, as a matter of fact. Well, David,
this is the 3rd time we've used the map. We've never got that straight. The light gray and the dark gray.
The South is really ripe Republican territory, is what that says. I mean, Richard Nixon did well down there before. Jimmy Carter was a kind of an aberration because he was a hometown boy 4 years ago. But this portends something for the Democrats for the future as well. They just, it's a revived GOP south of the Mason-Dixon line.
Well, I wonder if this might not mean that South Carolina would go to the Republicans.
You know, it was the South that elected Carter last time. The rest of the country voted pretty much as expected. The South turned itself all the way around and voted for Carter, whereas it had been going more and more Republican in the years prior to that. This time, if it goes back to where it had been before, it's really bad news for Carter, whatever color his television set. I want to ask Jessica something. Jessica, you don't have anything yet on Jay Rockefeller in West Virginia.
No, we don't have a projection on
I
that
am
yet.
worried about him. In the previous election, he gave his net financial worth at $19 million. A lot of money. Rockefeller, $19 million. He is spending this time $10 million.
10 he is.
Well, now, what does that mean? One more election and he'll be broke and on food stamps?
Well, I think what it means is one more election, he's going to hope to up the stakes by maybe looking at a vice presidential spot or maybe running for president. Maybe that's cheaper.
Well, at those prices, he'll still be broke. A Rockefeller on a food stamps would really be a milestone in this country.
They have bumper stickers down there. The opposition's running bumper stickers that says, make them spend it all, Jay.
It's the best thing for the West Virginia economy that they've had in a couple of years now.
Well, we're going to have to pause now, everybody. That's our coverage, and that's where the election stands at this time. We'll be back.
Tonight's election coverage is brought to you in part by Comsat General Corporation, a Comsat company.
Good evening on this election night 1980. We are going to be here with you at 22 and 52 minutes after the hour throughout the evening. Going to be bringing you up to date on all that's happening with reference to the local races in this area. We've got live cameras and News Center 4 reporters all over the place covering a lot of the campaign headquarters. In Virginia, the polls were to have closed at 7 o'clock. I suppose some of them have, but many of the polls in Virginia, polling places that is, are still open. And we are told that there are 200-300 people in line at some of those polls. NBC News has projected Ronald Reagan will be the winner in the Virginia contest. Out in Vegas, they're also predicting Reagan will be the winner in the country. They're saying it's 9-5. NBC's poll is a little more scientific than that, a bit anyhow. They do it on what they call an exit poll. That is, they ask people who they voted for as they're coming out of the polling places. And on the basis of that, we are told, or they figure, that Reagan will win. They don't tell us how many people say none of your business. There are probably a few of them, too. The polls in Maryland and the district will not close until 8 o'clock. And we'll be having reports from there also. In Virginia, there are two races that we're keeping a very close eye on. That is the 8th Congressional District and the 10th Congressional District. You're looking at them right there, Marty.
Jim, in the 8th Congressional District, Stan Paris and Herb Harris. Harris, the Democrat, the incumbent at this point, out to a rather substantial lead. If we can change over and have a look at the early numbers we have in from the 10th, and we'll have to remind you again, the polls are not closed in Virginia because people are still lined up to vote. Here is the way it is at this point in the 10th District. Frank Wolf and Joe Fisher. Joe Fisher, the incumbent. It is hard to assess anything from the early figures. We certainly are not going to project anything from them. Dick Smolka, our election analyst, is with us. And Dick, You have said all along that you felt that the 10th and the 8th would be close. The 10th probably the closest of all of the races in this entire area. What did those early figures tell you, if anything?
Well, I did not see where those came from. If I knew where they came from, I could tell a little bit, but I'll go back there, and as soon as we find out where they come from, then we'll have a good idea.
Explain what you mean by that, because that's important, where they came from.
Well, we have a record of how these precincts have voted over the last 10 or 12 years and how these candidates have done in the precincts, how the party has done. And so, based upon their track record and the turnout in the precinct, we can get a pretty good idea of that precinct's contribution to the total outcome, and from that we can make a pretty good estimate of which way that district is going to go.
You have one of the most populous precincts in the entire nation.
Yes, the Burke precinct in the 8th district has over 6,000 voters, and that's one's going to come in late, and it's so big that we really have to watch that, because if it goes one way or the other, mostly new voters, mostly people who have just moved out there, and we don't know how they're going to vote.
All right, we're going to take a break and be right back.
The people who own ships like this one and the people who sail them think it's a good idea to keep in touch with one another. Even though every vessel in international trade has a radio, atmospheric changes can make radio transmission unpredictable at best. That's why today many shipping companies and oil companies involved in offshore drilling depend on Marisat, the remarkable satellite communication system developed by ComSat General Corporation. Using Marisat, a captain can be in direct voice contact with his management people on shore. He can send and receive telex messages or facsimile data. Crewmen and passengers can even call their families at home. For years, ComSat General has helped show the world the way to use satellite technology to solve specific communications problems. Indeed, ComSat General has often been up there with the answers before the questions were asked. For answers in orbit via satellite, think first of ComSat General Corporation.
We have one added dimension to our election coverage here at News Center 4. Stan Bernard is manning a national desk. Stan is watching races throughout the country, the races of senators and congressmen who serve on key committees, committees whose judgments and decisions affect not only the area in which we all live, but the future of the federal worker as well. Check in now with Stan and see what he has to say about what's going on so far. Stanley?
Exciting place, a newsroom on election night, Marty, and where there already appears to be a major defeat of one committee chairman over in the Senate. The chairman of the Select Committee on Intelligence, Birch Bayh, he's a member of the Committee on Appropriations, projected a loser in Indiana by both NBC and CBS now. Now, Bayh was going for a third term. Tough to win a third term in Indiana, but he has apparently lost to Dan Quayle, a two-term member of the House. Now, there will be considerable juggling of chairmanships in the next session of Congress. We'll be explaining that as we go through the evening. But the next senator in line of seniority to take over the Intelligence Committee will be Walter Huddleston of Kentucky. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Stan. I'm wondering if we can ask Dick, Jim. I'm curious about how many of the projections in the long run are found to be sustained. How many of those hold up and how many of them reverse?
Almost all of them hold up. We rarely have, the national networks have a very, very good batting average on this one. And as far as I'm concerned, we try to make sure absolutely that the projection is solid.
In other words,
it cannot be reversed.
If you tell us something is gospel, we can depend on it.
I'm very conservative on my projections.
All right.
One thing I would like to say,
go ahead.
Our projections are based upon figures that we have that are not necessarily fed into our system. We're getting it from two different sources, so that we're not basing our projections on 1% of the total. We have very good numbers when we make
So our 8th and 10th district figures from Virginia that we showed, we should not be paying a great deal of attention to at this point in time.
We don't have information on
where they came from.
Right.
All right, thank you.
Okay. As we noted, the polls in Maryland and the district are not going to close until 8 o'clock, a little more than a half hour from now. Traditionally in the district there have been problems in getting votes in and getting a counting to get us out of here before 2 o'clock in the morning, but they seem to have those problems under control. We expect it not to be too long a night anyhow. We invite you to stay with us. As I said, we'll be here at 22 and 52 after the hour. Join us. We'll be back in a few minutes.
X is for extra sexy. X is for extra dazzling. And now X is for extra body. Introducing brand new Flex X. Extra body shampoo with balsam and protein. Plus, an extra Revlon bodybuilder no other shampoo has. Feel the extra rich lather. The extra sexy body you get. X marks the spot. X marks the winner. X marks the newest Flex. Extra body shampoo and extra body conditioner, too. From Revlon. Extra beautiful.
Let's all together live in, loving, day or night. Join and shine, looking and bright. Joy and
The Mary Tyler Moore Hour, weekdays at 9 on Channel 4.
Decision 80. NBC News continues its election night report. Here are John Chancellor and Tom Brokaw.
Good evening once again. It is early on this election night, but already there is a lot of good news for Ronald Reagan of California on our election map and a lot of bad news for Jimmy Carter, the president from Georgia. We have a state just coming in. NBC News now projecting that Ronald Reagan will win the state of Ohio and its 25 electoral votes. Reagan wins Ohio, a big key industrial state in the Midwest. Its 25 electoral votes go into his column. He'll add those to Indiana, Virginia, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, all colored blue on the NBC News election map. That means they go into Ronald Reagan's column, and that's a very impressive beginning for him on this evening. And no Republican has ever been elected president of the United States, by the way, without winning Ohio. Here's the electoral vote as it now stands. Ronald Reagan, 83, Jimmy Carter, 12. Carter's all come from his home state of Georgia. Needed to win 270 altogether. So it looks like a very substantial victory for Ronald Reagan, as we have been saying all evening here, before this evening is out, and it may be an early evening indeed for Ronald Reagan. It will be a long evening, however, for Jessica Savage, who is going to be counting the 435 House races and also taking a look at the governor's races around the country. And Garrett Utley keeping his eye on 33 Senate races for us tonight. Say nothing of John Chancellor, who is here taking a look at the vote as well.
To say nothing of David Brinkley.
And David Brinkley, who is going to be joining us from time to time. We're so delighted. He had surgery just a week ago. But tough old bird that he is, he insisted on being here tonight. We're delighted.
He'll take that tough old bird term up with you when he gets here.
I know he will.
Let's have a look at the national popular vote now. We have it in from a number of states, mainly those states in the South and the Southeast, but as far north as Ohio. And we see that with 2% of the precincts in around the country, that Reagan has a lead of less than 200,000 votes, but the important thing to look at is the percentage. 4% for Anderson, 42% for Carter, 53% for Reagan now, with the votes beginning to roll in from several states in the South, in the East, and one big, very important Midwestern state, Ohio. And looking at some individual state races that we're getting in here, we have projected Reagan the winner in the state of Indiana. You see a third of the precincts have reported, and he's got a very large lead, bigger than Gerald Ford did 4 years ago at the moment now, 57% for Reagan. And in Kentucky, we have results from there, 2/3 of the precincts reporting there, a 5-point solid lead for Reagan. Jimmy Carter won that state last time with 53% of the vote about. He's now got 46% of it coming in. It shouldn't go more than that. Garrett Utley. Birch Bayh is our projected loser in the state of Indiana.
He fits in the projected loser. Dan Quayle is the winner there. We projected that a few minutes ago. We have some other projections coming in, results coming in predominantly from the southern part of the country. First of all, in South Carolina, this is not really a surprise, but NBC News now can project that the incumbent, the Democratic Senator Ernest Hollings, is headed for re-election, that he will defeat his Republican opponent, Marshall Mays. And in Georgia, Herman Talmadge. NBC News projects that Herman Talmadge will be reelected to a 5th Senate term. He's running with a good lead over Mac Mattingly, the former head of the Republican Party in the state of Georgia. Talmadge faced a very tough fight during the primary earlier this year. In fact, he had to face a runoff to get his party's nomination. He's also had problems because he was denounced, repudiated by his Senate colleagues for the misuse of office funds. But Herman Talmadge has lived again. We project him the winner in Georgia. And in the state of Ohio, which just a moment ago we projected for Ronald Reagan in the Senate race, we now project that Senator John Glenn, Democratic incumbent, will be reelected there, defeating Republican candidate James Betts. So when you add it up already, we have projected 5 Senate seats, Senate races. The Republicans have made a net gain so far of 1. They have taken away the Democratic seat from Birchby in Indiana. And that's where it stands right now, with some other very close races in the South. We'll have some information in just a few minutes on those. Tom?
Thank you, Garrick. 4 years ago, Jim Baker was a key figure in President Ford's campaign, and he had his heart broken on this night 4 years ago. It's a far different story this evening for Jim Baker, who's in California at the Reagan campaign headquarters, the Century Plaza Hotel, with Heidi Schulman. Heidi?
It is a different story this year. Jim Baker, the early indications are that the trend is in Ronald Reagan's direction, that he is leading substantially in key states around the country. Is that the same thing you're hearing?
That's the same thing we're hearing, Heidi, and we're very optimistic.
Somebody said a moment ago that there are big smiles on everyone's faces upstairs. That's the case?
That's true.
We have called now Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, key southern states for Ronald Reagan. Those, of course, were a primary target for you. But we all tend to talk about Jimmy Carter's South. How do you explain what is happening in the South tonight?
Well, you know, we've said for some time, Heidi, that we thought we could at least cherry pick in the South. From early indications, we may do better than that. But we've always felt that his base was nowhere near as secure as our base in the West, and that's proving to be the case.
Also, Ohio in the Midwest, which was, of course, was a key battleground this year. What are the indications from there?
Well, judging from your exit polls, it's pretty good. And in fact, I think the exit polls of all 3 networks show that the swing states, Ohio, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Michigan, the states where we really expected this battle to be fought are breaking our way.
Someone had suggested, someone from the Reagan campaign earlier, that Ronald Reagan is a ballot box candidate, that people don't tend to say in the polls that they will vote for him, but they go out and do that on Election Day. Is that your feeling?
Well, I'm not sure that that's true. It's obvious, though, that the undecided vote is breaking our way, and we're very pleased about that.
Okay, thank you, Jim Baker. Now back to John Chancellor in New York.
Mr. Baker, like a lot of other politicians and journalists who have talked about an exit poll. That's the poll we've been referring to this evening, a poll made by NBC News and the Associated Press. Well, other organizations do it as well, talking to voters as they come out of the polling places. And we base some of our reporting this evening on that. Some call it an exit poll, others call it a voters poll. We'll be back with more after this.
Picking and choosing the right investments requires very careful handling. One wrong move can easily damage the best laid plans. At Merrill Lynch, we know that size and strength can be very valuable. But it is our sensitivity to your investment goals and agility in helping you reach them that makes us what we are. Merrill Lynch, a breed apart.
Sam, answer the television.
Zenith announces space phone.
It's probably my wife. Dave, answer the television.
Are you kidding me? This could be my boss. Hubie, you answer the television.
Just push a button and answer the phone right through your new Zenith.
Hello?
Who's this, please?
Hubie Brown?
Congratulations, UB Brown. You've just won a free world cruise.
Space phone only on Zenith System 3. We're moving television into the future.
Back before anyone ever dreamed of an energy crisis, a Sunday afternoon drive on quality General tires was,
Triple dip, here I
well, pretty much for the fun of it. Today, we need more efficient driving, like making fun trips, work trips on any of General's full line of radial tires that help save gas, Sunday or any other day. Quality, choice, price. General has a tire for you.
Sooner or later, you'll own General's.
Smell that bacon. Nothing can penetrate this stuffy nose.
This can.
Hall's Mentholyptus?
With vapor action. Hall's vapor action penetrates deep into clogged nasal passages to help your stuffy nose feel clearer, while Hall soothes your throat to help you cough.
Hey, this is something. The bacon? No, the Halls.
For penetrating relief, get Hall's vapor action. Now in new ice blue, too.
Some figures to keep in mind about the state of Ohio, where we have named Ronald Reagan the projected winner of that state's 25 votes. Ohio unemployment is 9.1% when last checked. Youngstown, 12% unemployment. Toledo and Cincinnati, 10% unemployment. Keep that in mind as we go through this following analysis based on our polling in Ohio today. Ronald Reagan won Ohio, which Jimmy Carter carried by 11,000 votes 4 years ago, because the voters were most deeply concerned about inflation and also the maintenance of American strength abroad. And the voters in Ohio felt that Ronald Reagan could do something about both better than President Carter. So far, NBC News Associated Press poll takers have talked to 1,500 Ohio voters as they left the polls, and the results on these issues now: only 22% of the people concerned with inflation voted for the president, while 71% concerned with inflation cast their ballots for Ronald Reagan. Only 28% of the voters worried about U.S. strength abroad, then they voted for the president, but more than two-thirds, 68% of those worried about American strength abroad, went for Reagan. Another striking result in Ohio, a heavily industrialized Midwest state which had been losing both industry and jobs. Only 19% of those polled listed unemployment as one of the most important problems they face. But that's with 9% unemployment, that's understandable. Carter and Mondale made an appearance on the last campaigning day of the campaign yesterday in Akron, Ohio. It did not work. Tom?
John, there's been a lot of talk in the course of this election that someone may win an electoral victory, but not the popular vote here tonight. We're going to show you the popular vote right now and show you that Ronald Reagan is not only running ahead in the electoral vote, but he is running substantially ahead in the popular vote as well. 3% of the precincts reporting in nationwide. Ronald Reagan with a percentage lead of about 11 points now over President Jimmy Carter. Changes in the numbers, but not in the percentages, as you can see. John Anderson at 4%. That's an important figure, one that he'll be watching very carefully. He has to get 5% of the popular vote to qualify for federal election funds. And for every percentage point above that, he gets about another $700,000. So there will be a lot of cheering and straining going on at the Anderson headquarters tonight, not because they think he can win, but because they need the money to pay off the campaign debts. Someone who's been with us during this long campaign season is Theodore H. White, the author and historian, and he's right behind me right now with someone else who's been with us through it all, Bob Jameson, covering the Anderson campaign, tonight interviewing Teddy White. Gentlemen.
Tom, Teddy, we've been talking for a moment about points of reference. What kind of historical context would you place the election tonight in?
It's still too early to say, because I think it's still building. But if it builds at this dimension, it could be of landslide, and it could be the end of an era, as 1932 was the end of an era, as 1964 was the end of an era. Some elections are just ripples. Others are tides coming, and there's a tide of change, I think. The sense I think the country has had growingly over the past few weeks of loss of control over events, loss of American power, humiliation abroad, uncontrollable inflation here at home, gives people a sense that things must change. And we have to wait, I think, a few more hours to see how big the dimensions of this apparent victory is.
Teddy, when you talk about the end of an era, are you talking in terms of 1932, when Franklin Roosevelt was elected for his first term, or 1952, when Dwight Eisenhower was elected?
I'm speaking of the end of an era in the sense that we're going to have to do our rethink again. We have been a free trade nation almost since 1932. We've been for free trade. That was a good idea 50 years ago. But when I see the devastation of Detroit and Toledo, the auto industry, the steel industry of the USA, when we left that war, we made more steel than all the rest of the world put together.
Teddy, we have just a few seconds. If the indications are correct, it would be a big Reagan victory. Where did President Carter go wrong?
I think he was caught and cramped and squeezed by history itself. It was less his fault than the forces arrayed against him.
Teddy, thank you. Gentlemen?
Jessica Savage has some information on both the governor's race and things that are going on in the House of Representatives. Jessica?
We have the third of our projections of the evening to offer. We offer a projection. James Hunt will be reelected. We project Governor of North Carolina, defeating his Republican challenger, State Senator Beverly I. Lake, a male. Again, NBC News projects that James Hunt will be the winner in the North Carolina gubernatorial race. He will be the first governor in modern times elected to a second four-year term there in North Carolina after winning the opportunity to do that with a constitutional amendment. He came up with the idea 3 years ago. As we said, we had two other governor's races projected in Vermont. Republican Governor Richard Snelling reelected, and in Indiana, Lieutenant Governor Robert Orr is the projected winner. There's been somewhat of a Republican sweep so far in the state of Indiana, and we think it's affecting the race in the 3rd Congressional District. John Bradamus, House member since 1958. There you see it with 64% of the precincts now reporting in. His opponent, Republican challenger Hyler, with slightly more the vote than Bradamus has. It's a very tight race there. Bradamus people say that they're not really sure that the House Majority Whip will be able to come out of this one. The Hyler people say that there is a large vote turnout in that area, but that their 1,000 or so volunteers that they had today made some of that large voter turnout theirs. That is one of the races the Republicans have targeted, and as you see there, the candidate is not doing that well. Bradamus may not be reelected. In the Abscam races, 5 Democratic House members have been implicated in the FBI's Abscam bribery investigation. They are all in very close races tonight. Let's take a look at one of them, Michael Myers of Pennsylvania, the first congressman to be expelled by his colleagues since the Civil War. Organization politics, he's looking to help him defeat his challengers. It may be enough to help him get by the GOP challenger Robert Burke, but that's a nominal candidacy. There's an independent running very strongly there, candidate Tom Folgera, who's been endorsed by Philadelphia Mayor Bill Green. And in the John Jenrette race in South Carolina's 6th Congressional District, an area of tobacco farms, an area where John Jenrette used to run very strongly. He was recently convicted in bribery charges in the Abscam investigation. He held a press conference October 13th, and they said that he would run again. And his candidate, challenger, GOP challenger there, is a guy by the name of John Napier. He's an attorney. He's a former aide to Senator Strom Thurmond. He's one of the Abscam challengers who received party money prior to the Abscam case coming up, and Napier has decided not to make an issue of it. We have very little in the way of precincts reporting in less than 1% of the precincts. Napier leading 312 to 86. As we said, that's not enough to make any kind of an indication, but that race promises to be a fairly decisive one. Tom.
Thank you, Jessica. And just to bring you up to date on the presidential race, it is looking very good for Ronald Reagan at this time. In his Hollywood days, he made a film called Bedtime for Bonzo, and that often comes up at his rallies around the country. Recently, he has been saying, just remember, Bonzo grew up to be King Kong. If this keeps up, Bonzo grew up to be the President of the United States. And we'll be back after this.
I'd get hemorrhoids, just what I need now that I drive a cab.
Here, try what I use, Preparation H.
You too?
Anybody can get hemorrhoids, especially people who sit a lot. But Preparation H often gives me fast, temporary relief from occasional pain and itch.
Sounds great.
Even helps shrink swelling of tissues caused by inflammation.
I'll try it.
Tips good this week?
Yours was the best.
Preparation H relieves pain and itch, even helps shrink swelling.
Foot fixer makes your feet feel good. Foot fixer makes your feet feel good.
The Foot Fixer, a total foot care system from Clairol, with an automatic heater to keep the water hot and a vibrating water massage that soothes and refreshes.
Foot fixer makes your feet feel good.
The Foot Fixer from Clairol Research.
I see you're buying a long-lasting nasal spray. Why?
It gives me long-lasting relief.
How long?
Well, it says 8 to 10 hours.
Here's Duration nasal spray. How long does it give relief?
It says up to 12 hours. That's some difference.
That's 2 to 4 hours longer. That's because Duration has the longest-lasting nasal decongestant. Now, which one are you going to use?
Why, this one. Duration.
Duration with up to 2 to 4 hours more relief. The proof's on the package.
We're Exxon. We're Bob Larkins, whose department is ready to invest billions to develop synthetic fuels. We're James Phillips, who's helping make oil from shale rock a reality. We're Dave Wims, on a major project to turn lignite into gas. We're Judy Wood, at work in a test plant that turns coal into liquid fuels. We're Bob Lang, developing a better way to turn coal into synthetic gas. We're more than 100,000 people working on energy. We're Exxon.
We're back, and joining us now is David Brinkley, and framed behind him is the map that looks very encouraging for Ronald Reagan, looking more encouraging as the evening goes on, with Ohio added to Indiana, Virginia, as you can see, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida behind us. All of those important states in any election, but especially against Jimmy Carter, who had hoped to use the base that he's used in the past, the South. But Ohio was a big loss for him.
Well, you know, Tom and David, the electoral vote tally now is getting a little bit bigger. Carter still has only the 12 electoral votes from Georgia, and Reagan has a little more than 30% of the electoral votes that he would need to get the magic 270. That's not bad for 10 minutes of 8 Eastern time.
You know, John, I was thinking, you and I spent a little time talking to Carter's mother, who said in the unlikely event that her son lost, she wanted him to come back to Plains and cut grass and clean up the yard. She may have him there.
Well, let me tell you what Helen Thomas of the UP reported tonight. She learned that the president was informed Monday night that samplings taken by pollster Pat Goodell showed it was all over, in those quotes, and the campaign manager Robert Strauss, this is according to the UPI, reportedly informed workers that the president had lost.
You have the feeling that he knew that this morning, or that he was in deep trouble when he made that emotional appearance in Plains. Talked once again about being proud to be a Southerner. Those are roots of which he is proud, occasionally even defensive. And the South, on either side of him at least, Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi, not with him, and we don't know about South Carolina yet. And yet Democrats doing well in the South. Fritz Hollings, who's got an accent that's more Southern than a bowl of grits, it seems to me, is the epitome of the Southern senator. He'll be back. And who else will we call? The governor of that state as well. Hunt will be elected.
Carter has never had a really proper Southern accent.
You know, it's kind of the Herman Talmadge, Fritz Hollings have got the corner on that in Washington right now.
Carter never really had it. I think he spent too much time outside the South or something.
Well, I'm amazed at the way things are going, if they are going the way we think they're going, and our polls indicating a substantial victory for Reagan. Who would have thought that Reagan could have, apparently, what he's going to do tonight, he's going to do extremely well.
Well, but Reagan, the man, perhaps you'd have some doubt about that, but the Republican Party has been a revived party in the South. They've been working very hard at it down there. There's a new GOP political base that has been building there for some time now, right through Richard Nixon and along. In Alabama, they're given to saying these days the 3 M's are what's important. The military, motherhood, and the maker. And that all cuts very well for the Republican Party.
Well, the South has been going Republican for one race after another, until Jimmy Carter in '76 turned it around, as we were saying. And this time he has already lost some of it and may lose more. And it's bad news for him.
All right. In the next hour, we get the great big dump of votes from many of the big states, Illinois and Michigan and Missouri and New Jersey and all that. And that's where the election stands at this time.
This election night coverage is brought to you in part by Kicks Country and by the Moore Cadillac Company at Tyson's Corner in Virginia.
Good evening and welcome back to News Center 4's coverage of the 1980 general election. We are going to look first to Virginia to have a look at the presidential election in Virginia. The NBC News has already projected that Ronald Reagan will take Virginia. About 15%, now 16% of the vote is in. Ronald Reagan carrying the state of Virginia 53% to 41%. The only precincts of those precincts reporting where Jimmy Carter is showing any strength at all is in precincts in the Alexandria area. and he is not showing that much strength in the Alexandria area in those key precincts, but it is the only place so far of the precincts reporting in Virginia where Jimmy Carter has shown any strength. The state projected to go to Ronald Reagan. That is the projection at this time with 12 electoral votes.
There is an interesting thing happening in Virginia's 8th Congressional District, which covers Alexandria, incidentally. We have some ticket splitting going on down there. The incumbent, Herb Harris, is running against Stanford Paris. They have run against each other before, back in '72, as a matter of fact, when Harris took the seat from Paris. As you can see, Herb Harris is ahead right now with these precincts that have reported so far. These are very early returns, by the way. They are not conclusive by any means. And as you can see, Herb Harris is running well ahead. But he is running well ahead in areas where Ronald Reagan is also running well ahead in the presidential contest, which indicates that those folks out there are splitting the ticket, as they have done, in fact, before. Did the same thing, as a matter of fact, back in 1976 when they went 52% for Gerald Ford in that district, and they also went 52% for Herb Harris. Also in Virginia's 10th Congressional District, we've got a really close contest there. Joe Fisher, the incumbent, he's running against Frank Wolf for the second time. And at the moment, Wolf is ahead of Joe Fisher, beating out the incumbent at this point. Again, we point out that these are very early returns. They are not all that conclusive. That has been quite an interesting contest, that is, a very severe contrast between the two candidates and what they claim to be standing for. And we'll be watching that one very closely. We might add that both in the 8th and in Virginia 10th, we got rematches, people that have run against each other before.
And the 3rd major district, we have a rematch as well going on. That is in Maryland's 8th district. Newton Steers and Michael Barnes, the most expensive race in the history of this area, about $800,000 being spent for that congressional seat. Kelly Burke is standing by at incumbent Michael Barnes' headquarters with the latest from there, which does not look to be a lot in terms of activity anyway. Kelly?
No, but they're getting together here. The band's getting ready to play. I'm told the beer is going to start pumping in another few minutes in a victory celebration. Premature? Yes, indeed. Michael Barnes did indeed lead the campaign in the polls, by as much as 18%, and some of them by as little as 6% in those taken by Newton Steers. But he's concerned about the close race the last time with Newton Steers, about the tough campaign that Steers has waged, spent twice as much, about close to $500,000. The concern about voter sentiment in the national election, we hear it's going toward Reagan, and the unpredictable nature of the Montgomery County voters. It's too early, but the people here certainly are still confident. They are pleased with the voter turnout. If the first returns look good for Barnes as he expects, he may be out here early in another hour, and they could have a heck of a celebration here, the Montgomery County Democrats. I'm Kelly Burke reporting for News Center 4 from Barnes headquarters in Rockville.
We've got Lee Thompson out at Newton Steers headquarters. Barnes snatched this seat, this 10th congressional seat, away from Newton Steers back in 1978. Lee Thompson is standing by there. Lee, there's not a whole lot going on there either, is there?
Well, I don't know, Jim. I think it would be fair to say that the mood here is getting to be a little bit more optimistic. I think these Republican spirits are lifted by the fact that Reagan seems to be doing pretty well nationwide, although they do point out that that doesn't necessarily mean more votes for Newton Steers. Montgomery County has a history of crossing over on its ballots. We should be able to project the winner, though, shortly after 8 o'clock. That's because the computer in Rockville has already counted the early morning vote, a heavy vote, and it should put that vote out shortly after 8 o'clock. It should also be pointed out that there are 16,000 absentee ballots out in Montgomery County. That's a lot, and it could make a difference if this election is close. Newton Steers is expected to arrive here about 8:30, and we're going to be back. And this is Lee Thompson at Newton Steers headquarters in Bethesda.
All right, thank you, Lee. We'll continue with our coverage of the general election 1980 right after this.
I'm really cooking to it.
The new sound of Kicks Country.
When I'm on the job, I knock around to it.
Kicks Country, 106 FM and 73 AM.
I always feed my boys to it. Get kicking, Radar.
Put new kicks in your life with a new sound of double country. Get into our boots on Kicks Country, 106 FM, 73 AM.
The more Cadillac.
And
ready when you're ready. New soft Philadelphia brand cream cheese. It's always spread and ready.
Spread and ready, whenever you want it.
New soft Philly cream cheese from Kraft. It's the cream cheese you love, only softer. Right out of the fridge.
Spread and ready, whenever you want it.
New soft Philly cream cheese. It's ready when you're ready.
Creamy, smooth, and ready to spread and spread. Spread and ready. Spread and ready. Spread.
When you know better, you know best. Better with a GE digital bathroom scale. Easy to read electronic readout, turns on instantly, and locks in on your weight. A great scale at a great price, only $33.86. With everyday low prices on a GE FP2 food processor blender. It slices, chops, shreds, blends, and more. Only $62.43 plus a $7 manufacturer's rebate. At Best Products.
Decision 80. NBC News reports the results of our national election. Brought to you in part by Merrill Lynch, whose ability to guide you through the intricacies of investing makes them a breed apart. And by IBM, helping put information to work for people. From the NBC News Election Center in New York, here are John Chancellor and Tom Brokaw.
And welcome to those of you who have just joined our coverage of this quite remarkable election, the 49th presidential election in the United States, and we are seeing every sign of a substantial victory for Ronald Reagan. We have already projected some states on our map for him, only Georgia so far projected for the president, and now with the polls having closed in a number of states and other key indicators have coming to us, we are going to project a number of states for Ronald Reagan, beginning with the state of Connecticut. Connecticut, with its 8 electoral votes, goes to Ronald Reagan. Our next projected victory for Ronald Reagan is New Jersey, with 17 electoral votes. New Jersey for Reagan. Going westward, we project Pennsylvania for Ronald Reagan. Pennsylvania, in his column, we project 27 electoral votes there. Further, Michigan, the state of Michigan, we project for Ronald Reagan 21 more electoral votes for his total. We go on. NBC News projects Illinois for Ronald Reagan. Illinois with its 26 electoral votes. Going further west, we project the state of North Dakota. No surprise there. He had been expected to take North Dakota's 3 electoral votes, and South Dakota, 4 electoral votes, which we project in the column for Ronald Reagan. Moving southward to Kansas. In the state of Kansas, we say Ronald Reagan is our projected winner. We also project Reagan the winner in the state of Missouri with 12 important electoral votes. Further into the border states, it is our projection that the state of Tennessee will be taken by Ronald Reagan, 10 electoral votes there. Going further south, the state of Oklahoma with 8 electoral votes, we project for Reagan. And finally, the big one, Texas, 26 electoral votes. We color blue or light gray, if you're watching in black and white, for Ronald Reagan. The map is turning blue for Reagan. Tom, can you tell us how many electoral votes that adds up to now?
I can right now. We're going to show you on your screens at home. Remember, the number that is needed, 270. Ronald Reagan already at 252. This reminder, that's what he has at this stage of the evening without his home state of California, where there are 45 electoral votes. That's still to report in.
And the 12 votes, electoral votes you see there, are all from one single state for Carter, his home state of Georgia. So far, we've been unable to project Carter a winner in any of the other states. Of course, he'll win some other states this evening, but the imbalance on the map behind us is as striking as I have ever seen it working in this studio at this hour of the night. That is Remarkable. One state so far called for a sitting president of the United States, and as I say, the red states will be filling in on the map, but an awful lot of the big ones have gone to Ronald Reagan.
In an elementary way, what it means is that Jimmy Carter has been totally surrounded by Ronald Reagan. He has been isolated in his home state of Georgia, and that's where he stands. So, as we have been using our words carefully this evening, we have been saying it is going to be a substantial victory for Ronald Reagan. You can take it from there, taking a look at that map. The West, Ronald Reagan's very solid base still to report in this evening. We're going to be looking as well at some very close Senate races all night long, too. 33 of them altogether. Garrett Gutley will be covering them. Garrett, what do you have?
Yes, Tom, first of all, let's recap the Senate races which we've been able to project so far tonight. First of all, in the Democratic column, the Democratic senators are doing pretty well, all in all. In Kentucky, NBC News has projected Wendell Ford, the Democratic incumbent, going back to the Senate. In South Carolina, Democrat Ernest Hollings returning to Washington. In Georgia, Herman Talmadge going back for a 5th term. And in Ohio, Senator John Glenn going back to the Senate for a 2nd term. On the Republican column, they have picked up a seat in Indiana. We project that Dan Quayle, U.S. Congressman from Fort Wayne, Indiana, will defeat Senator Birch Bayh. Birch Bayh has been in the Senate for 18 years. In a way, those who live by the campaign slogan die by the slogan. In 1962, Bayh defeated Homer Capehart, who had served 3 terms, saying 18 years is enough for any man in Washington. Guess what Dan Quayle was saying against Birch Bayh this time? 18 years is enough. The 4-term jinx worked. Bayh has been defeated there. I want to alert you to 2 very interesting and close races in the South, which may reflect a bit the strength of Ronald Reagan in Alabama and Florida. Let's look first of all at the race currently underway in Alabama. The results are coming in there now between Jeremiah Denton, a former prisoner of war in North Vietnam, the Republican candidate, and Jim Folsom Jr., son of the former governor of Alabama, a famous name in Alabama. Denton is now leading. Only 13% of the precincts reported. Too soon to project. But if Denton is elected, it'll be the first time Alabama has had a Republican senator since Reconstruction days. Let's look at Florida, not very far away. Only 6% of the precincts in so far, but, well, there you see it. Bill Gunter, the Democratic candidate, neck and neck with Paula Hawkins, a Republican, a former member of the Public Service Commission in Florida. There have been only 3 Democrats elected to statewide office in Florida since the Civil War. It's much too early to make a projection in either of those 2 contests, but it is possible at least that a Republican could win both in the Florida senatorial race and the Alabama race tonight. And that would be making history in those 2 states. That's where the Senate race stands right now. John.
Let's look at the popular vote, Garrick, and see how this is all tallying there, because we've got 4% of the precincts around the country reporting in dozens of states now, and we see that Reagan is holding a 5. Now he's increased the lead since we looked the last time. A 6-point lead, 7-point lead over President Carter. John Anderson is still at 4% of the vote we have tallied so far. Quite a night. And more to come. We'll be back after this.
Reaching your financial goal is never as simple as some people would have you believe. You have to know exactly where you're going and make the right decisions at the right time. At Merrill Lynch, it's our skill at guiding you through the intricacies of investing that makes us what we are. Merrill Lynch, a breed apart.
Mr. Chairman, yes? The delegate from New York Life wishes to... Yes, the delegate say New York Life? Yes, sir, and we...
What has New York Life got to do?
Mr. Chairman, since 1845, our company has insured 11 American presidents. 7 in this century.
Order, sir. Life insurance is a personal matter.
It's a family matter, and we vote for the candidates who choose New York Life for family protection.
Can they do that?
You know, Ethel, I think it's time we sold the old homestead.
Who do we call? We handle the who do you call.
Where do you turn?
What are you going to do? Trust the Realty World folks in Bloom to cover it all for you.
Your local Realty World associate is specially trained to sell your house quickly, even helping with buyer financing information.
We can do it.
Realty World covers all the details.
We'll cover it all for
I'm Pete Conrad. Every 2 minutes, somewhere in the world, another McDonnell Douglas DC-10 takes off. Today, more than 300 DC-10s fly the colors of 45 major airlines. This DC-10 will head for Rio. This one will fly the Atlantic. This one links Canada with Australia. This one flies New York to L.A. The DC-10 proves itself in the air, 1 million miles a day. It's one of the world's most thoroughly tested airliners.
Ronald Reagan apparently headed for an enormous victory tonight. As we show you on our map, he is winning in all of the key areas, the industrial Midwest, parts of the Northeast, and the South as well. A big win for him, the state of Michigan, where both candidates spent a lot of time. And the single most important fact about the Reagan victory in Michigan is that he won everything in the state except the city of Detroit, where Mayor Coleman Young was working hard for President Jimmy Carter. Now, we talked to a lot of voters today as they came out of the polls, including voters in the state of Michigan, almost 1,200 of them altogether. Talked to people representing NBC News and Associated Press, and here's what they told us. Ronald Reagan won only 27% of the vote in Detroit, but in the suburbs, which are important in that state, he took 57% of the vote. And in the rest of the state, he won 55% of the vote. In the rest of the state as well, something unexpected happened. Carter and Reagan split the blue-collar vote, which normally, in Michigan especially, is heavily Democratic. This happened despite the intensive campaign on behalf of the president waged by the United Automobile Workers Union. In that union, Mr. Carter did pick up 60% of the vote, but that was not nearly enough to offset the gains of Ronald Reagan and the rest of the state of Michigan, so the 21 electoral votes from there go into the Reagan column, John.
We have another projection, and this time for President Carter. NBC News projects President Carter the winner in the District of Columbia. 3 electoral votes. The district has been voting since 1964, has never voted for a Republican presidential candidate. The president carried it last time with about 80% of the vote. A very high tally, but not unexpected. That brings the electoral standings to Carter 15, 12 from Georgia and 3 from the District of Columbia. Reagan all over, as Tom Brokaw said, the industrial East, the South, parts of the Middle West, the Dakotas, 252 electoral votes in the states marked in blue on your map, or light gray and black and white, and that's how it looks. Very early on this evening, it has been possible for NBC News to project all of that. We also have, in this election, a number of extremely interesting contests in terms of the Senate and the House. The number of the Senate Appropriations Committee chairman, the Senate Small Business chairman, the Senate Intelligence Committee chairman is up. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee chairman, Senator Church, is having a tough fight. The House Majority Leader, the House Whip, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the chairman of the Public Works Committee, the chairman of the Interior and the Agriculture Committee in the House, all of them are facing difficult contests this time. There's quite a story there, and Jessica Savage is covering it for us.
I would imagine a lot of that story we'll see some of it in the coattailing effects that some of this Reagan landslide, the way it looks to be at this point, might have on some of those races. But first, NBC News has a projection to offer. It was a race that David Brinkley talked about earlier, a race that's supposed to be one of the most expensive gubernatorial races in history. NBC News projects now Democrat Jay Rockefeller will be elected governor, re-elected governor of West Virginia, defeating his challenger, Arch Moore. Moore ran against Rockefeller in 1972. Rockefeller defeated him. Then Moore narrowly lost the Senate race in 1978 to Jennings Randolph, and he decided this year he'd take on Jay Rockefeller one more time, and Jay Rockefeller supposedly spent $10 million getting the vote out. Apparently got the vote out, and it went the way expected. Jay Rockefeller, we project, will be re-elected governor of West Virginia. Tom.
Jessica, we were told just a few moments ago that we had some pictures of Ronald Reagan leaving his home in California, and we will be standing by to go to those as soon as we possibly can. I think right now John has got some votes for us down south.
I do. First, let's have a look at the popular vote again, which is mounting around the country. Now you see we're over 1.5 million in each race, and Reagan's lead is holding at 7 points, with 4% of the precincts reporting. John Anderson's vote edging up there, but he's very far behind. Well, it just changed. Reagan's lead increased just a little bit there. These numbers, incidentally, that you see on your home screen are being fed to us by a computer, and so from time to time they will change while we're on the air with them. One of the things that has to be disappointing to the president is his showing here, 7 points behind with the election as far along as it is. Tom?
The vice presidential candidate on the Ronald Reagan ticket, of course, is George Bush. He contested him strongly in the primaries and then helped him a great deal, perhaps even in his home state of Texas, his adopted home state. Well, this evening, George Lewis, who covered the Bush campaign all year long, talked with George Bush.
I did hear the NBC report. I think it's too early to do anything but at least have your hopes up at this point.
Are you surprised by that at all?
Yes, because I've felt that it would be very, very close, and it still might well be. But I must say it's more encouraging to have these so-called exit polls speaking favorably.
With the findings going your way, apparently, in the polls, what do you think made the difference in the closing days of the campaign?
I think the debate clearly was a major turning point, and our inside tracking figures showed that since the debate, Governor Reagan was doing very, very well, and we followed it very carefully, and he continued to break those undecideds over. But again, it's awful early to really assess it until you know what actually happens.
George Bush looking confident and with very good reason. Here's John Chancellor now with more news.
Well, the time has come. You've seen the map. We've looked at the figures, and NBC News now makes its projection for the presidency. Reagan is our projected winner. Ronald Wilson Reagan of California, a sports announcer, a film actor, a governor of California, is our projected winner at 8:15 Eastern Standard Time. On this election night, we have projected Ronald Reagan the winner. And to add evidence to that projection, we are projecting him as the winner in more states. By our calculations, Ronald Reagan is the winner in the state of New Hampshire, in the state of Vermont, Delaware, and South Carolina. We will be coloring in those on the map now in blue for Reagan, or light gray, black and white. New Hampshire is the first state that we are calling for him in this list of states. Vermont, we are coloring blue in a projection for Reagan. The state of Delaware, we are projecting for Reagan. And in the South, the state of South Carolina, we are projecting for Ronald Reagan. And that brings his electoral vote tally to the number required for victory. According to our projections, Ronald Reagan now has the required 270 electoral votes. Carter with 15 at this stage of the evening, 12 from Georgia, 3 from the District of Columbia. And Tom, that's our projection. It is a rather early call.
It certainly is 8:15 on election night. This race has been, the word we've been using all year, has been volatile, fluid, mercurial, whatever. But I don't think anyone anticipated that it eventually would become a floodgate of one kind or another, where the votes would just flood in for Ronald Reagan.
Tom, 4 years ago, we called the election for Jimmy Carter at 3:31 a.m.
I remember well.
And going back, talking about calls this early in the evening, I called for Richard Nixon in 1972, a little bit earlier than this, but this will go down as one of those nights when we are calling very early, and there's the evidence on the map. Reagan has, as Tom has pointed out, the western states still to come. And we saw little softness for him in most of those western states, some doubts about the ones in the Northwest, Oregon and Washington. California was leaning. We do not see, given what evidence we have now, that the president will be able to overtake Reagan at all, and certainly not in the West. And most of the big industrial states now, New York has not been projected yet, but most of those big states are in, and Reagan took them.
I can't, a personal note, I can't help but recall in 1966 riding around in a Greyhound bus with him, with Lynn Nofziger, as he was trying to win the Republican nomination for governor of California, and a lot of people were laughing at him then in 1966. And they have learned in every election in which he's been involved, never laugh at the chances of Ronald Reagan. He has always won by pretty substantial margins, except when he's run for president a couple of times in the Republican Party. But when he gets into a general election, he does extremely well.
So he's now won the big one. David Brinkley will be along after this.
All over the world, Wang is the leader in office technology. Word processing, data processing, and now with our new electronic mail system, you can send all kinds of information from one part of the world to another. So New York can be around the corner from Paris, London from Tokyo, and San Francisco next to Rome. Wang, making the world more productive by bringing it closer together.
Introducing an American car designed for a changing world and with a commitment to quality. Introducing the beautifully new Ford Granada. Built with a new design, smaller in size, yet more spacious than ever before. Built with Granada's highest mileage ratings ever. And built with Ford's quality control system. 38 different inspectors examine every single car. The new Granada. Built for a changing world from Ford.
David Brinkley has joined us. David, what do you think about all this? We've called the election.
I know, at 8:15. What I think is that we are going to see the beginning of a new conservative movement in this country's current history. It's too early to say how the Congress is going, how the Senate is going, but whatever happens, the thing to remember is that all of the members of the Senate who are in trouble, whether they wind up winning or losing, those who are in trouble are all liberals. And however that turns out, it is going to terrify liberal members of the Senate. And with Reagan in the White House, a scared bunch of liberals, not as many as in the past, in the Congress, he's going to have his way. And so we're going to see a rightward movement in the direction of the U.S. government. I would say substantially so.
Yeah, he has talked about using it, as Theodore Roosevelt called it, the bully pulpit, and he's masterful at that, at using that kind of an office. We've seen him in one campaign after another, how effective he is on television. He is a kind of prototype of the conservative in this country. He has been active in that wing of the Republican Party for a long time, very practiced at the rhetoric of it, so I think that you can expect to see that.
I wonder how ideologically conservative Ronald Reagan really is. It has always seemed to me, Tom and David, that he was not that right-wing when he was governor of California, and I had the sense this year that he was a man who didn't want to become president because of a great ideological crusade. He was a fellow who wanted to become president. He thought he deserved it. He thought he'd do a good job at it, but I don't think he brings in a great deal of passionate baggage on the conservative side. Not that he isn't a conservative man. He surely is.
Sometimes his rhetoric exceeds his behavior in office. That was certainly true in California. He went in on a wave of conservative rhetoric and then had a very liberal, or by and large liberal legislature with which to deal, and became a more moderate governor.
Well, a number of people who know Reagan well, better than I do, and perhaps better than most of us do, see him as a sort of Eisenhower, a kind of amiable Republican who is conservative but not wildly, screamingly so, and who will be easygoing in the White House and will decide nothing outrageous until he has talked to everybody in sight.
Well, that's where the election stands at this time.
Tonight's election coverage is brought to you in part by Comsat General Corporation, a Comsat company.
Good evening and welcome back to News Center 4's coverage of the general election throughout Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. We have some returns now coming in from Maryland. And we'll go first to Maryland's 8th Congressional District. Michael Barnes, who won the seat in 1978 from Newton Steers, will retain his seat. News Center 4, based on the projection now, is that Michael Barnes has retained his seat and will be returned to Congress from Maryland's 8th Congressional District. These from the early returns now coming in from the state of Maryland.
We've also got some projections with reference to some of the contests in the district. Two of the more important questions, the only two questions really on the ballot. One, the initiative on gambling, the other, a referendum on statehood. The initiative on gambling, we are projecting, will be approved. This is on the basis of 100% of the boxes that were turned in from the morning voting on gambling. We are showing that, we are projecting, that is, that the initiative on gambling will win. That would allow numbers, the lottery, bingo in churches, and raffles for charitable purposes in the district. On the referendum that would begin the process towards statehood, we are projecting that that measure will also be approved in the district. That will not guarantee the district statehood status, but it will begin a very long process that could in fact take decades. We are also projecting that President Carter will win the district. He's got 74% of the vote based on the ballots that were turned in from the voting this morning. That is no surprise. The district always goes very heavily for the Democratic presidential candidate. We are pleased to welcome here with us now the district's mayor, a Democrat, Mayor Marion Barry, and I suppose, as I said, it comes as no real surprise to you that the president won.
Not here, anyway. We always do well. And one thing that's very good, it appears, Jim, that we're going to have a large turnout. I had said we would probably get 175,000, 200,000 on yesterday. I think we're going to make that. It's amazing. People are pouring out all over, and I'm just delighted to see that.
It appears, though, Mr. Mayor, that Ronald Reagan at this point is going to be elected president of the United States. Will that make any difference at all with reference to the district's relationship with the White House, with the administration?
Well, I think it will. Naturally, I was a strong Carter supporter, and if it turns out that the projections are correct, that Ronald Reagan will be president, I'm going to do all I can to reach out to him and his staff, to acquaint him and his staff with all the unique problems of the District of Columbia. I've not heard any specific positiveness about budget autonomy, which we really want to get into, and transfer of prosecutorial authority and a fixed form of payment. But I'm going to do all I can to reach out to him and hope that he's receptive to our plight here, and just work hard to make sure that the district is included in his priorities.
Mr. Mayor, do you have any reason to believe at all that he won't be sympathetic and won't be helpful?
Well, I don't know enough about him. You know, I've been looking and feeling so strongly about President Carter, and I haven't had a chance to. I've had overtures from people before now to sit and talk with some of his top advisors about the district, but I didn't want to do that because it would appear as though I would be conceding that the president didn't have a chance to win. But now, if that's true, I'm going to make it my business immediately to sit down with the people, and I think that we're going to do all right, relatively speaking. I think Democrats don't have a tendency to be more understanding of city problems in general, but we're going to work awful hard.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, we thank you. The mayor will be back with us again in this next cut-in in this election coverage. We've got to take a break now. We'll be back in just a minute. Stay with us, please.
Frontier of communications on Earth is here in space, where Comsat General is pioneering answers to questions which are only now being asked. One answer is Comstar, a communications satellite that shares the load of terrestrial telephone facilities by handling 18,000 two-way telephone calls at the same time. Another Comsat General answer, developed in partnership with IBM and Aetna Life and Casualty, is Satellite Business Systems. SBS links the communications of large nationwide businesses, government agencies, and other organizations. It will handle voice, computer communications, document distribution, even televised business conferences. For years, Comsat General has helped show the world the way to use satellite technology to solve specific communications problems. Indeed, Comsat General has often been up there with the answers before the questions were asked. For answers in orbit via satellite, think first of Comsat General Corporation.
Our News Center 4 projection is that Michael Barnes will carry the 8th District in Maryland. He will retain the seat that he won from Newton Steers in 1978. Projected winner for Congress, Maryland's 8th District, Michael Barnes. We're going to go now to Barnes headquarters. Kelly Burke is standing by there. Kelly? It looked like it was an interesting interview. Obviously a technical problem. Yeah, Kelly usually does well. Problem, obviously, with the audio coming in from the 8th District. Kelly is covering Michael Barnes' headquarters there, and we'll have to get that straightened out soon.
The point of the fact is that this is live television, so you might expect that from time to time. We hope not too often throughout the course of the evening. Once again, let's state that Michael Barnes has won. It was a very close race, one of the most expensive that's ever been waged in this local Washington area. But it appears that Michael Barnes' money was well spent because he's going to go back to Congress. We're going to be back here again at 52, I guess, before the hour.
That's before the hour.
And the mayor will be with us again. I hope. Won't you stay, please?
Yeah, I'll stay for
Thank you.
Talk a little bit more about the district under Reagan.
Stay with us.
Good thing I'm not running.
Checks. You write a batch of them every month. Checks for groceries, clothes, the mortgage, the car payment, utilities, and so on. They add up to a lot of money. But now, Bank of Virginia offers interest checking, a way to earn interest on the money you have to spend until you have to spend it. So before you write another check, ask about interest checking at Bank of Virginia and start earning interest on the money you spend, not just on the money you save.
Today's cars, with newly designed engines, are built for performance and better mileage. And to help keep the new cars and all cars running the way they should, here's Amoco's lead-free choice. Quality Amoco lead-free in the blue pump and Amoco premium lead-free in the gold pump for engines that need high-octane performance.
And they're both seasonally blended for better starting and smoother warm-ups in winter.
You expect more from a leader.
Follow the man who knows how to go for it, George Michael, weeknights on News Center 4.
Decision 80. NBC News continues its election night report. Here are John Chancellor and Tom Brokaw.
Hello once again, and just to bring you up to date, NBC News has projected that Republican Ronald Reagan will be elected President of the United States over President Jimmy Carter. Let us show you the map now and show you why we are able to make that projection. As you can see, blue for Ronald Reagan, and there's a good deal more of that than there is red for Jimmy Carter. In fact, Jimmy Carter only has his home state of Georgia and the District of Columbia. The rest of the map, as reporting in so far, belongs to Ronald Reagan, and that includes the key battleground states, as we were calling them, of Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, all of those states that were going to be critical. That includes Texas as well. Ronald Reagan taking big chunks, knocking the props out from under Jimmy Carter's so-called southern base tonight. It's all over, as NBC News sees it, and at the White House they are acknowledging that as well. The aides in resignation, knowing that they have been beaten. And this is the electoral vote as we have it so far based on our projections. 270 needed to win. Ronald Reagan is right at that figure. Remember that the West still is to come in. That includes the 45 electoral votes out of his home state of California, where he is expected to do well. Jimmy Carter with only 15 electoral votes at this time. Ronald Reagan headed for a landslide victory tonight. But there are a good many other races as well, many of them in the Senate. And Garrick Utley has been keeping track of them. I think you have some projections for us.
We have some projections, Tom. These are not real surprises. There are a number of big question marks hanging over a number of Democratic senators as to whether they'll survive the Reagan landslide, whether his coattails will be long enough to pull Republicans into office. But let's go to these projections. First of all, in Connecticut, NBC News projects that the Democratic candidate Christopher Dodd will be the winner there, that he will defeat James Buckley, the Republican. Abe Ribicoff is the Democratic senator who's retiring in Connecticut, so that seat remains in the Democratic column. In Maryland, we are now projecting that Republican Senator Charles Mathias will be reelected, defeating his opponent, Democrat Ed Conroy. Mathias, a liberal Republican, somewhat of a maverick in the Republican Party. He had the endorsement of the AFL-CIO. He draws heavily among Democratic voters, although he is a Republican. He is going back, a liberal Republican, reelected in Maryland to the Senate. In Kansas, Senator Robert Dole, Republican conservative, Gerald Ford's running mate in 1976. We project him to be reelected to defeat Democratic candidate John Simpson. And in North Dakota, where Senator Milton Young, Republican, is retiring, we project that the seat will remain in Republican hands. Mark Andrews, our projected winner, defeating Democratic candidate Kent Johanneson. So far tonight, we have projected 9 Senate races out of the 33 which are up for grabs today. The Republicans so far have gained only one seat. That's in Indiana, where they've taken it away. But I would certainly think that a number of Democratic candidates are very nervous. Democrat liberals such as John Culver, let's say in Iowa, such as perhaps Gary Hart, George McGovern in your home state of South Dakota, Tom. These kinds of Democrats, seeing the trend in Indiana and what is happening on that map back there, must be very worried as to whether they're going to survive.
I would think so. We were talking about the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Frank Church, out in Idaho, Warren Magnuson in the state of Washington, chairman of the Appropriations Committee.
One person who may take some comfort, surprisingly enough, is Barry Goldwater, Mr. Conservative, Arizona, up for re-election. The recent poll showed him in almost a dead heat against his Democratic opponent. If the Reagan tide continues and Reagan gets a big vote in Arizona, Barry Goldwater should be encouraged by that.
Derek, actually, the polls were shifting a little bit to Goldwater toward the end with the error factor in the poll. The last poll had a 6% error factor in it, which made it close. But if you read that poll another way around, it didn't look so bad for Goldwater.
He wasn't reluctant to say as well to the voters of Arizona, I want to go back and help my friend Ronald Reagan out. And if that carries through in Arizona, it will help Barry Goldwater out as well, because it was for Barry Goldwater that Ronald Reagan made that memorable television speech in 1964, and it began his political career.
It really did. Let's go on. Let's have a look at the popular vote now. The popular vote, with 6% of the precincts reporting, shows the same lead that Reagan developed over Carter earlier this evening, holding now as the votes come in. A 7-point lead, 51% of the vote now. That will almost certainly go up as the percentage. The Reagan percentage ought to go up, because there are very few places, given the traditional dynamics of the Democratic Party, where Carter could get sizable numbers of votes. A lot of those votes have already gone to Reagan in those states. Some of the states, however, we have been unable to make projections on, and we'd like to look at some of those. Kentucky, for example. The vote tabulations in the Louisville area, they are slow tonight, so we don't have any projection of the winner because of that slowness. But Reagan is ahead in a state that President Carter carried 4 years ago. Similarly, in North Carolina, which I think will come up there in a moment, we have 7% of the precincts in. North Carolina has voted only for Richard Nixon since the end of the Second World War. It did it twice. It looks as though it is going Democratic now, but with 7% in, it's kind of hard to say. Going on to Maryland, another state we have not had a projection in, about a fifth of the precincts in, and you see that Reagan is doing quite well, over half of the vote now. If that were to hold, he would join Richard Nixon as being the only Republican candidate in a very long time elected by the state of Maryland. And in West Virginia, a state that was regarded as safe Democratic, it's voted Democratic in 10 out of the last 12 elections, Carter is ahead there. Tom?
We're going to have continuing coverage of this evening, the Senate races, Jessica Savage for the governor's races, and the House, of course, 435 seats at stake there. More to come after this.
Right in your neighborhood, maybe right on your street, is a very unusual family. And if you know what's good for you, you go in and meet them. It's the Century family of companies. There's a company that insures many drivers other people won't. A company that does nothing but life insurance. A company that helps you take care of your health. That's our family. A family that includes thousands of independent agents and sales representatives. The Century family of companies for all your insurance needs.
At Budget Rent-A-Car, you're number one.
I'm sure glad I switched to Budget. Their low rates really saved me money, and Budget's located right inside most airports, so it's just as fast and convenient.
At Budget, you're number one.
When my company told me to rent from Budget, I thought I'd have to give up the service I'm used to just to save money. But frankly, Budget, you won me over.
At Budget, you're number one. Hello, I'm Glenda, and I'm a soft touch.
She's a soft touch.
I'm Alicia, and I'm a soft touch.
Nivea moisturizing lotion is known the world over for soft hands, smooth bodies, and silky legs.
And you can be a soft touch, too.
Give me a soft touch.
When you're searching around for investment ideas, it's easy to lose your bearings. What appears to be a profitable trend can be here today and gone tomorrow. But even when there seems to be no place to turn, Merrill Lynch has an uncanny ability for matching your goals with fertile investment advice that makes us what we are. Merrill Lynch, a breed apart.
Rolling along now with considerable interest in some of the Senate races, some of the House races, and some of the governorships. Here is Jessica Savage.
Two more governor's projections, both of them Republican, one of them an upset. NBC News projects Republican Christopher Bond will be elected governor of Missouri. He will defeat challenger incumbent Joseph Teasdale of Democrat. Kit Bond and Walkin' Joe Teasdale, as he calls himself, ran against each other the last time around in Missouri, and Bond felt very secure about winning, but Teasdale upset him at that time. It was supposed to be some kind of a vindictive race where the two of them wanted to get together and go at it one more time. And it was close right up into the end. Both candidates showed polls showing each of them running neck and neck, but NBC News now projects that Republican Christopher Bond will be elected governor of Missouri. Another projection. This one is not a surprise. NBC News projects Republican and governor incumbent Pierre DuPont will be re-elected governor of Delaware, defeating his Democratic challenger William Gordy. This, as we say, was no surprise. Pierre DuPont, a one-term governor there, has been very popular in the state. In fact, they had a great deal of trouble coming up with a Democrat that wanted to challenge the very popular sitting governor. So they came up with the majority leader of the House since 1959, William Gordy of Laurel. He gave up his seat in the State House to run in this election, but he did not win. Again, NBC News projects that incumbent Republican governor of the state of Delaware, Pierre S. Pete DuPont, will be reelected. So far, of the 6 gubernatorial races we have called, out of the 13 there were up, the Republicans held on to all 3 of their incumbencies, and they picked up one. The Democrats, as expected, held on to the 2. That's the way the gubernatorial races stand at this time, John.
And in the presidential race, our pollsters have been at work all across the country talking to huge samples of voters. One of the reasons that the voters may have voted for Reagan is that they trust Reagan more than they say they trust the president to do what is right. NBC News and the Associated Press surveyed voters as they came from the polling places today and asked them to rate the candidates on this trust issue. And here's what the voters in 3 important states told us. In Texas, 39% gave Carter high trust ratings. 54% said they had high trust in Ronald Reagan. Now let's look at Maryland. In Maryland, 37% rated the president high on the issue of trust, but 45% gave Reagan a higher trust rating. And let's look at Pennsylvania. 35% said they trusted the president to do what is right. 47% said they trusted Reagan to do what is right. It's interesting that those ratings in those 3 states, Texas, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, are all about the same. And we checked 7 other states so far, and we find the same thing. More voters saying they trust Reagan to do the right thing than are saying that about the president. Tom?
Presidential years are sometimes hard to get your hands on something that has an effect, but those are devastating figures, it seems to me, for Jimmy Carter, who, through good news and bad, has always had a good trust rating with the American public. They have believed in his integrity. They believe that he's trying to do the right thing. And when a president begins to lose the trust of the American public, then he's in some trouble.
Well, and speaking plainly, he was running against a man perceived by large parts of the electorate as an actor. And Jimmy Carter had run in 1976 using trust in himself and his abilities. So that's quite, as you say, that's a remarkable.
Those are really devastating figures. We have Judy Woodruff standing by at a not very happy place tonight. It is the White House, and they have been well aware all evening about how grim the news is for them in this election. Judy, what do they think down there? I heard you say a few moments ago that Pat Goodell was saying that it broke bad for them over the weekend, that the Iranian hostage situation was the final undoing. They can't believe it was only that, though, do they?
Well, that is what Pat Goodell is saying, Tom. I'm sure you're aware that there are other pollsters who will have other points of view on that. I know that Bob Teeter, who has done some polling for the Republicans, has said that the trend was obvious early last week when the undecided voters started breaking toward Reagan, most of them toward Reagan and not toward Carter.
And that was exactly what the Carter campaign had been counting on all along. They're very heavily negative Reagan. The speeches the president was making, the commercials on television they were running were anti-Reagan, and they hoped that would, in the end, with the pressure on, bring the undecided voters and the Anderson supporters back to the president. It didn't happen. They've gone to Reagan.
Judy, do they feel at the White House that the president lost the debate in the perception of those people who saw it on television?
I think they acknowledge that that is true. We were told late last week that their polling was showing that Reagan had picked up several points immediately after the debate, that he had picked up, as a matter of fact, from Anderson supporters, that the president had lost some support. So they feel that the debate was a decisive event in the campaign. I think most of them would have preferred that the debate had never taken place. We were talking with some of them yesterday about whether they wished earlier on that the president had gone ahead and debated John Anderson and Reagan when he had the opportunity. But I've been led to believe that if they had it all to do over again, they probably wouldn't have. They were so afraid of giving Anderson a boost and having that hurt them even worse than it obviously has tonight. John?
Theodore White was saying just a few moments ago, Judy, as well, that he believes that President Carter was the victim in part of historic circumstances, the Iranian situation, the OPEC oil prices, the terrible economy. He cannot, of course, say that he didn't play his part in all of those events, but the fact is that there was a kind of historical unloading of him. We're now seeing Ronald Reagan. NBC News projecting Ronald Reagan, the next president of the United States, the 40th president, at 69 years of age, with his wife Nancy Reagan, leaving their home in the Pacific Palisades, where they will go to the Century Plaza Hotel. I would guess with the police escort in Los Angeles, that's about a 20-minute ride through the hills of West Los Angeles. There, they will greet their campaign workers and some of the president-elect's closest friends, if he remains that, and we expect that he will.
I believe we'll be seeing that, won't we, Tom?
I think so, at the Century Plaza Hotel, where they are gathered. The Republicans, among the close friends, a kind of a kitchen cabinet, as they have been described over the years. They took a look at Ronald Reagan after he made that speech for Barry Goldwater in 1964 and said, "You ought to get in elective politics," and began to back him. Men like Justin Dart, Dart Industries, Holmes Tuttle, a prominent Los Angeles automobile dealer, William Frank Smith, who is Governor Reagan's personal lawyer. These are people that you may not see in prominent government positions, but they indeed will have an important advisory role, as they almost always have had for Ronald Reagan, 2 terms, governor of California. Reagan...
They all make a lot more than they could make in the government.
They all do very well indeed. They are, I think, by certification, all millionaires. Ronald Reagan has lived most of his adult life, as you know, in California, as an actor, as a television host, as the governor of that state, 3 times as a presidential candidate. But he grew up in Illinois, in 6 towns altogether, but the town that he calls his hometown, and the folks in Dixon certainly are calling it his hometown now, is Dixon, Illinois. And we have Fred Briggs there tonight. That, if you'll pardon me, folks, in Dixon is the New Plains, Georgia of America. Here's Fred Briggs.
Dixon, Illinois, the boyhood home of Ronald Reagan, going somewhat wild tonight on the news of the projected winning. However, Dixon really had no doubt. They'd planned this victory celebration weeks in advance, and there may be some parts of the country that may have been called too close to call. They never thought there was any such thing as that. The celebration here actually started at 6 o'clock Central Time, which is when the polls close in Illinois.
There was a parade across the Ronald Reagan Bridge on the Rock River to downtown Dixon. A torchlight parade it was supposed to be, but the brisk north winds made maintaining lit torches a little impractical. There was the Dixon High School band from Reagan's old high school, where he played football for a while. And there were a number of Ronald Reagan cousins, first and second cousins in various stages of removal, most of whom really didn't know Governor Reagan except for a brief meeting during the Illinois primary last spring. When the crowd heard that Reagan was the projected winner, here's what happened.
Ronald Reagan is the winner of the 1980 election. He is our next president.
Well, the night is young as far as the celebration is going here. In an hour or so, they're planning a fireworks demonstration. The publisher of the Dixon Advertiser, the local paper, wants to have the first newspaper in the country out in print saying that Reagan is the winner. I am told the presses are running right now. The people here are very happy. This is a town of 18,000 people, and one could almost believe they are all here. They would only wish that Governor Reagan could be here with them. Fred Briggs, NBC News in Dixon, Illinois.
Well, that's a much bigger town than Plains.
They'll find out about it, though. We have another projection, this time for President Carter. NBC News projects President Carter the winner in the state of West Virginia. 6 electoral votes there, and no great surprise. And we will now fill in red, or dark gray in black and white, the state of West Virginia for the president. That means so far this evening we have projected him with 21 electoral votes. That's Georgia, West Virginia, and the District of Columbia. And Reagan, while the polls are still closed in most of the states in the West, is holding at the 270 electoral votes we project him to have. That's enough to win. David?
I would like to ask a question of you folks. We have here what I think reasonably could be called a landslide, or certainly something approaching a landslide. Where did it come from? Nobody anticipated it. No polls predicted it. No one saw it coming. How did that happen?
We may give you that answer in just a few moments, but I am told that while we think about it, we're going to go to a commercial, so we'll have the answer for you.
You got a minute.
Right after this.